Hello everyone. The following presentation is a brief summary and analysis of Chapter 9 of Oscar Wilde's novel The Picture of Dorian Gray. Basil arrives at Dorian's home and expresses his sympathy for him, for Sybil Vane and her family. Basil came to visit Dorian as soon as he heard about Sybil, but he found Dorian absent. When Basil finds out that Dorian had been out to the opera, he is shocked. Dorian completely ignores the topic of Sybil Vane and describes the glorious singing he heard at the opera. Basil is appalled. He asks Dorian how he can talk of opera singers when Sybil's body is lying in the slums. Music, art, and life presented on a stage keeps drawing Dorian in, almost like an addictive drug. Dorian doesn't mourn for Sybil as if she were a person. He mourns Sybil as a piece of art. The fact that he has gone out to the opera in search of more artistic inspiration shows that his addiction to satisfying his senses and immersing himself in hedonistic experiences have completely taken over his character. He is living out Lord Henry's influence and ideas. Basil continues to speak about Sybil, and when he says there are horrors in store for that little pale body of hers, Dorian orders Basil to stop talking. Dorian says that the incident of Sybil's death is over, that he has mastered his emotions in response to it, and that they must no longer think about it. Basil is in total shock at the change he sees in Dorian's character. He sees someone who is completely the opposite to the innocent, lovely young man who once sat for him to paint. Basil blames Lord Henry for corrupting Dorian, but Dorian only praises Lord Henry. Dorian outright tells Basil that it isn't Lord Henry who has made him narcissistic and vain, but that it is Basil himself who should be blamed for this. Dorian continues to think of Sybil's death as art, but Basil's mention of her pale body brings her out of this world of art. This reality triggers Dorian for a moment, but as soon as he realizes this, he demands for Basil to stop talking. It is interesting to note that even though Lord Henry has taught Dorian to embrace all life has to offer, Dorian can't face the reality of Sybil's death, but instead hides behind artistic illusions and ideas. Basil feels ill at the idea of Sybil killing herself. However, Dorian explains the beauty of her death, saying that Sybil is now a piece of art herself. By going to the extremes of taking her own life, it is as if she could be a heroine in a beautiful story. With a philosophy sounding very much like Lord Henry, Dorian describes how his mourning for Sybil was brief. Dorian, also very much like Lord Henry, finds the fact that Basil shows compassion to be quite annoying. Dorian admits that he has changed. He now lives a hedonistic, artistic lifestyle. However, he says he still wants Basil's goodness and friendship in his life. Basil gives in and remembers his feelings of fondness for the young man. Basil's worry now is whether the police will be after Dorian, but Dorian assures him that he was only known to Sybil's family as Prince Charming. It is interesting to note that Basil's initial reason for wanting to capture Dorian in a painting was because of Dorian's innocence and his lack of awareness for his own beauty. Basil wanted to turn Dorian into a piece of art because Dorian was pure and natural. By being transformed into art, Dorian is made aware of himself, his beauty, and the idea of seeing life as art. Dorian now sees everything as art and shows no sense of human decency. This terrifies Basil, but we have to ask ourselves if Basil is partly to blame for Dorian's new outlook on life. Or do you believe it is solely because of Lord Henry's theories and ideas? Basil finds that he can't remove himself from Dorian's life because he still remembers the innocent young man who inspired his art in the first place. Dorian asks Basil if he would paint a portrait of Sybil. Basil agrees to this, but he also wants to paint Dorian again. Dorian refuses this request. At this moment, Basil sees the screen hiding the painting, and he demands an explanation for why the painting is being covered. Dorian makes a feeble excuse about protecting it from the sun, but Basil goes towards the painting. Dorian has to rush before the painting to protect it from being seen by Basil. Dorian threatens to never speak to Basil again if he looks at the painting. Basil is confused at Dorian's defensiveness, but agrees not to look at the painting. However, he announces to Dorian that he has decided to exhibit the painting in Paris soon, so he will have to see it anyway. Dorian tries to hide his horror and exclaims that Basil said he never wanted to exhibit it, so why the sudden change of heart? There is a parallel in how Dorian views Sybil and how Basil initially viewed Dorian. Dorian sees Sybil as a symbol of art at its greatest, and Basil also saw Dorian as his inspiration for which he could create his best art. Dorian has to appear to be unaffected by Basil's request to see and exhibit the painting, but in reality he is terrified that Basil will see the truth. This is not only the truth about the change in Basil's painting, but it would mean that Dorian would have to reveal the truth about his corrupt soul to Basil. Dorian asks Basil if they can swap innermost secrets with each other. He suggests this as a means to shift the attention and conversation away from the covered painting. Dorian wants to know why Basil initially refused to exhibit the painting to the public. Basil begins to explain by asking Dorian if he noticed anything strange in the painting. Of course, we understand why this question triggers Dorian. Basil notices that this question strikes a nerve in Dorian. Basil explains that when he first met Dorian, he was overcome by an unusual fascination for Dorian. Basil says that Dorian's beauty was the inspiration for him to create his best art. In other words, he realized that Dorian would be his muse and his absolute creative influence. Even though his portrait of Dorian Gray is his best work yet, Basil realizes his mistake. The mistake was that his secret was being revealed on the canvas with each stroke of his paintbrush. Basil explained this idea in an earlier chapter of the novel. He believes that when people in general view a piece of art, more is revealed about the artist themselves than what is portrayed in the artwork. In other words, yes, the painting was of Dorian Gray, but Basil believes that more about his own inner feelings would be revealed than a person merely seeing an image of Dorian Gray, and because of this, he couldn't let others see the painting. Basil continues to explain that as soon as he removed the painting from his studio, the overwhelming feeling of a curse was lifted. Basil says that he is now able to clearly see the beauty of his artwork, and since then he has been determined to display the painting in a Paris exhibition. Dorian is relieved that Basil's secret has nothing to do with the secret that Dorian is harboring. Now that Basil has revealed his innermost secret, he expects Dorian to reciprocate by showing him the painting hidden under the screen or the cloth that covers the painting. As we could expect, Dorian tells Basil that there is nothing else to be seen in the painting. There is a power reversal in this exchange between Dorian and Basil. Earlier in the novel, Basil holds power over Dorian because he paints him and idealizes him. However, Dorian reverses their positions. He pressures Basil to admit his deepest secret, which is his artistic obsession. Meanwhile, Dorian withholds the truth about the portrait, maintaining control over what Basil knows. Dorian also emotionally manipulates Basil here. Dorian forces Basil into a moment of complete vulnerability. He uses this moment to distract from the accusations about Sybil Vane and Dorian's moral decline, which prevents Basil from pressing these issues any further. The painting is a representative of the truth. It is a symbol of Dorian's soul, and by hiding it, he is literally hiding the truth about himself. Basil, the artist who created the painting, is denied access. He is not allowed to see what his masterpiece has become. As Basil is about to go home, he reiterates the importance of Dorian and the painting to him. Dorian assures Basil that he views Basil's confession as a compliment. He says that Basil is a better friend than Lord Henry has ever been, and that his feelings towards Basil have not changed, but that he won't ever sit for another portrait again. Dorian reflects on how Basil's confession has explained their past encounters and how emotional attachments make things so tragic. Dorian is relieved that his secret has not been revealed, and he now decides to hide the painting. Thank you for watching this presentation on Chapter 9 of The Picture of Dorian Gray by Oscar Wilde. Keep an eye out for summaries and analyses of the rest of the novel.